So you want to join the ranks of the firsts? Well, first off, straight off the bat, I have to say, excellent decision there. The Dark Angels, as I've said many times, are my absolute favourite chapter and legion. I've loved them since the mid-90s when I started the hobby. I just love their scheme, their lore, their naming conventions for their characters. It all just appeals to me pretty much more than anything else in the entire setting across 40k or AOS or any other GW game systems. But if you wanted to get started with this faction and you're new to the hobby or to Space Marines or to just Dark Angels, where is the best place to begin? Well, I do have a video going through their latest codex, all of the units, the datasheets and the rules and everything like that, and I will link that down below. So if you want a full overview of the faction and which of the unique Dark Angel units are good and what the detachments bring for you, that is definitely a good place to consider. But if you just want to know what models are available and the best and which are the cheapest to get you initially started on that first 1,000 points or so, well, this is going to be where we discuss that in this video. So let's dive in and have a think. Now, all chapters these days can essentially lean into any theme now. With how the new detachments work in 10th edition, you can run Ultramarines in a Stormlance and go bike heavy, or you could run your Imperial Fists in a Vanguard Spearhead and go all Phobos and sneaky. So there isn't really a quote-unquote biker chapter or Terminator chapter like there has been in past editions in quite the same way. But that being said, the Dark Angels are still one of the best and certainly one of the most famous chapters if you are wanting to lean into bikes and Terminators. And that is because the Dark Angels have two very unique aspects to their army. And the Dark Angels in many ways can essentially be thought of as three armies in one. You can either do your standard generic Marine style list, which is called the Greenwing, the fully armoured heavy hitting infantry units of the Deathwing, and then the lightning fast mounted forces of the Ravenwing. The Deathwing in the lore is the Dark Angels' first company, the Ravenwing is their second company, and then the Greenwing generally make up the rest of the chapter's companies. Then obviously you have the scout companies towards the rear end. So whilst all Marine chapters have their elites and their veterans, yours are slightly more unique in that they are quite specific in their design. The Deathwing were up until recently all about Terminators, and every single model in that army and in that company would be wearing Terminator armor. That has now changed a bit in the most recent edition, and there is now the option to induct things like your Stern Guard and your Blade Guard veterans into those hallowed ranks, and they do come along now with that very recognizable bone white armor of the Deathwing. And so we may as well start with them first. If you want your army to be pure Deathwing, you absolutely can do that. And in fact, the Dark Angel Codex really helps with this, thanks to the Inner Circle Task Force detachment, which brings a load of benefits to your Deathwing units and really does reward you for going all in on them. Essentially, you will be running a lot of Terminators, Blade Guard veterans, Deathwing Knights, and support from your vehicles like Land Raiders and Dreadnoughts. And in terms of starting this kind of army, you're actually in luck because 10th edition has been very good to Terminators so far. There have been a load of brand new upscaled models coming out, and one of the easiest ways to just get started and dip a toe in with Deathwing is simply to get one of the new Space Marine starter sets. It's important to note this isn't the new Space Marine Combat Patrol, which is very, very similar, but the starter set is much better value. In the starter set, you get a Terminator Captain, 5 Terminators, as well as 5 Infernus Marines and 27 Tyranids. The Combat Patrol, by comparison, gets you the Captain, the 5 Terminators, the 5 Infernus Marines, and a Terminator Librarian. So you do actually get more Terminator models in the Combat Patrol, but the Combat Patrol is £100 rather than £67.50 for the starter set. So it's much more sensible to get the starter set. It's almost half as cheap, and when you either split the Tyranid part with a friend or just sell it on if you don't want them at all, you will be in a much better position in terms of the money you've spent than you would be compared to getting the Combat Patrol. And getting the starter set right off the bat gets you 275 points worth of Terminator models. I'm not counting the Infernus Marines here, this is just the Captain and your 5 Terminators that you'll have. So to supplement this up, in my opinion, you will need two things. Some more HQs and more Terminators. Now, Belial is the Grand Master of the Deathwing, so he's a very thematic choice. He's not super good rules-wise at present, but he does have a lovely new model, so he is definitely worth picking up if you want to dive into the Deathwing and you want to lean into that thematic, lore-friendly style of list for your army. He is a relatively cheap 85 points, and for £27.50 you can grab him and actually still be under the cost of buying the Combat Patrol set. Next up, we need more Terminators, and unfortunately the unique Deathwing Terminator box is no longer a thing. We do just have to settle for regular Space Marine Terminators and then bling them up with an upgrade sprue which you can get. The upgrade sprue isn't mandatory, but if you do really want to make your army stand out as Deathwing and have all the options and bits and upgrade bits available to you, that is something you will probably want to get eventually. The standard Terminator squad is £42.50, and that nets you 5 Terminators with a selection of heavy weapons from assault cannons to heavy flamers to the Cyclone missile launchers. The only thing you can't pick from this set is the plasma cannon, which is a Dark Angel's unique weapon for Terminators, and that does come in the previously mentioned upgrade sprue. So again, if you want that loadout, the upgrade sprue will unfortunately be a necessity. If I was just starting out with Deathwing and I wanted to lean into the theme, I would be tempted to go all in and buy 2 sets of Terminators, which brings your force, including the starter set, to 15 Terminators in total, alongside 2 characters if you also buy Belial, and that will put you right up to 720 points, and you can run the 10 Terminators you have as a 10-man block with the Captain or Belial attached, and then your second 5-man unit to keep in reserve to deep strike them in, to score you some secondaries or threaten enemy objectives. That is just a really good use for them. We aren't quite done with Terminators yet though, because to flesh this out to 1,000 points, I also think getting a box of the brand new Deathwing Knights is another fantastic addition to a Deathwing themed list. At 250 points for the 5 of them, that gets you a super durable midfield unit that can either go solo or can go along with the HQ that you didn't put with the 10-man Terminator squad to just bully anything in the midfield, or be this incredibly strong anvil that your opponent is just going to be forced to deal with. So buying all that, buying the starter set, the 2 boxes of Terminators, Belial and the Deathwing Knights, that will come to £224. And whilst it is not maybe going to be winning you any tournaments, it's not a super competitive list, I do think it's a great way to get started with a Deathwing army. You get some of your key iconic units, you get a load of Terminators, which if you are playing Deathwing is something you are probably a big fan of anyway, and it is a really solid shelf to expand off from. You can look as you expand to 2,000 points to get some more Terminators to form another 5-man secondary squad, or bump the 5-man squad up to 10-man to get 2 10-man blobs. Get another unit of Deathwing Knights if you wanted to expand that way. You could also even look into the Inner Circle Companions, which are another new unit and do have the Deathwing keyword. So although they are not Terminators, they do fit in with the Deathwing army quite well. I also think that with the vehicles that Deathwing tend to go along with, which is the Land Raiders and the Dreadnoughts, you could very well look into some long-range fire support from things like the Ballistus Dreadnought, which is very good at the moment, or the more all-rounder option of the Redemptor. They can both be painted up in the Deathwing Bone White scheme and do fit in incredibly well with a Deathwing list. You could, as I said just now, also fit in a Land Raider to get some more mobility on your Terminators, to get them around the board a bit more reliably and get them out and charging much earlier in the game. Belial, as I said, isn't great, and whilst I do think it's cool having him as this new awesome model, I would definitely be looking to also pick up the Terminator versions of both the Chaplain and the Librarian as I expanded this. Replacing Belial with the Chaplain and putting the Chaplain with the Deathwing Knights is a really good pick, especially if you've gone for the sword option for the Knights, because being strength 6 with +1 to wound from the Chaplain makes them fairly reliable into almost any target and absolutely devastating into certain targets like Marines, where they can now be wounding on 2s. In terms of how to expand the army, if you can find it, there are 2 recent box sets which went heavily on the Deathwing, the Deathwing Assault Box and the Inner Circle Task Force. These are both now out of print, but if you look around, you may still be able to find them in some smaller local shops. I saw as recently as yesterday, when I'm recording this video, someone had posted on Facebook that they'd managed to find one in a local sort of hobby shop. So they are still around. They are just quite rare, but they are brilliant things to pick up if you do manage to find them. Deathwing Assault had a £135 costing and immediately set you up with Belial, 5 Deathwing Knights, and 10 Terminators for 695 points straight out the box, which is incredible. The Inner Circle box, by comparison, got you some more units than just the ones in Terminator armor, but ones that still fit in very well with the Deathwing. It got you the Lion, 6 Inner Circle companions, a Terminator chaplain, and 10 Deathwing Knights. So that was an incredible 1,070 points, which for just £150 was brilliant value if you managed to grab that or you managed to find a copy anywhere. So if you do see either of those, highly recommend you pick them up immediately if you are wanting to start a Deathwing army. Next up, we have the Greenwing. This is your more standard Marines, and again, we can look initially to one of the box sets available to get this started. The Combat Patrols in particular, the Dark Angel Combat Patrol in particular, is actually not a bad little option. It's £100, and in this one, you get a Captain in Gravis Armor, 10 Intercessors, 5 Hellblasters, and 3 Blade Guard Veterans. Now, as mentioned earlier, the Blade Guard Veterans can fit in very well with the Deathwing list, so that is a solid pick anyway, but they do equally work quite well in a Greenwing list, I think, and some people do just paint them up in the Greenwing scheme if they are really against having anything but Terminators in their Deathwing. That is maybe not 100% lore accurate now, but some people still do it and it still works very well. Blade Guard Veterans can work well in a Greenwing list. The box itself isn't bad. It nets you 445 points for that £100 cost. And if you are totally new to 40k or Marines, it can be really handy to pick up. Things like the Intercessors are now a pretty decent battle line unit to pick up with the recent changes they've had. And you also get a really nice thematic choice for the Dark Angels in the Hellblasters, because Dark Angels heavily favor plasma in a lot of their weapons. So a unit of Hellblasters is very fitting for the chapter. One of the things you may have an issue with this combat patrol, and when it first came out, something that a lot of people were confused by, was the Captain in Gravis Armor. He is a bit of an oddity because he doesn't have any units in this combat patrol that he can join because he is in Gravis Armor. But funnily enough, in recent sort of weeks and months, he has actually seen quite a bit of play coming along as a unique solo piece, especially in the Gladius detachment. In the current meta, he can be a really cheap, durable little mini Catan style unit that works well as just a solo piece to go around and bully smaller enemy units off objectives. He's not amazing, but he has actually been cropping up in quite a lot of lists, because in Gladius you can make it so that he is a toughness 6, 6 wound, 2 up save, 4 up in run, 5 up feel no pain model that halves incoming damage. So he is actually quite cheap for a really durable little bully unit that can throw a load of strength 8 2 damage punches into things like small marine squads and just push them off objectives. So whilst he's a little bit of an oddity in terms of the box, he isn't actually awful just to throw in as a solo piece. Where you need to expand from this though, whether you are playing Greenwing or, to be honest, if you are just playing anything Dark Angel related, is Chapter Master Azrael. He is probably one of the best costed Marine units for any chapter at the moment, and for £28 and setting you back 115 points, he is a must-take really in almost any Dark Angel list. He brings so much value, especially for the Deathwing and the Greenwing, which we are considering now, and he is such a cool new model. So if you get him alongside the Combat Patrol, he is a brilliant choice to go with your Hellblasters, because he brings them a lot of protection, as well as further boosting their damage output by bringing them sustained hits. The Combat Patrol and Azrael, that sets you up at 560 points, which isn't bad, and honestly, if I was just doing the absolute quickest way to get into the Greenwing and Space Marines, you could be tempted to just grab 2 Combat Patrols and Azrael. Those 2 boxes will put you to 925 points if you leave out one of the Gravis Captains, so you can easily put an enhancement on the one you bring, and there you have a very quick, easy force to put on the table. It will cost you £228, and is just a very simple, quick way to get a Greenwing army on the table. Again, it's not going to be winning any tournaments, but it does get you some great battle line units to control objectives. It gets you 10 Hellblasters to do some long range damage output, and it gets you the Blade Guard Veterans to move up into the midfield and just fight off any enemy units that are trying to come towards your lines. Instead of going for the second combat patrol though, you could choose to go a slightly more expensive alternate route, which is probably what I would do, to be honest. You could choose to add some more heavy support, which I think would be beneficial as you are moving up to 1,000 points. Adding in something like a Redemptor Dreadnought is very thematic in my opinion for a Greenwing list. It gives you a nice, tough, stompy robot that is pretty durable, pretty good in melee, and has a plasma option, so it's really nice and thematic too. And at 210 points, slots in very nicely with Azrael and a single combat patrol to get you to 770 points. And then for that last 230 points to get you to 1,000 points, you could pick up a unit of scouts to help you do some actions and secondaries in your game, maybe pick up a box of Hellblasters, so you took 5 of them out of that box to bring your unit from the combat patrol up to 10 to make Azrael even more effective. That will bump you up to 955 points, which again isn't a bad place to be. You could, if you really didn't like the thought of the Gravis Captain, maybe trade him out and instead bring something like a Judicia to attach to the Blade Guard veterans to give them a bit more punch, and that would also leave you just enough points to get an Apothecary for Azrael and his squad of Hellblasters to make a really scary, durable Death Star style unit. All of that, all in, Azrael, the Judicia, an Apothecary, 3 Blade Guard veterans, a Redemptor Dreadnought, 10 Intercessors, and 10 Hellblasters. That also comes to 955 points, so a great way to get to just under 1,000 points, and then with an enhancement or two, get you to that 1,000 point mark. It would cost you a bit more, as I said, it's just over £300 for these, it's about £313 in total, so it is a bit pricier, but again, if you really didn't want him and you wanted to go for the Judicia Apothecary route, you could sell the Gravis Captain if you didn't want him and recoup some of that cost. Or if you are expanding towards 2,000 points, get him in and then get some aggressors or other Gravis units to go along with him to make him have a place. And then finally we have the Ravenwing component of the Dark Angels. This may be both the easiest and the hardest to build at the moment. It's easy because it's very simple. Bikes and speeders are your bread and butter. They are all pretty fun and actually fairly effective at the moment, and they get great value out of either the Stormlance or the Dark Angel specific Company of Hunters detachment, so it's a very easy way to build a list around them. The problem with them is that there is no easy, cheap box to pick them up in terms of a bundle at the moment, so this may end up being pricier than getting the Deathwing or the Greenwing, and also the Dark Angels have had a big refresh lately, but the Ravenwing stuff is still outstanding. So I do think a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about here may be getting either new models or completely removed from the Codex when 11th edition eventually rocks around in a few years' time. So you do just need to be aware of that. Some things here may well have a limited shelf life. Not confirming that they do or not because I don't know, but there is some stuff here that may be going away. And certainly I think things like the Ravenwing Command Squad, if they are following the same pattern as the Deathwing Command Squad, they may not be long for this world. In terms of how I would approach it though, at 1,000 points, you've got to start with one of the 3 mounted HQ options that we have access to, which is either the Chaplain on bike, the Master of the Ravenwing Samael, or the Ravenwing Command Squad. Personally, I love Samael and the Command Squad the most. It's not to say Chaplain on bikes are bad, I have 2 of them myself. I just think that both thematically for a Dark Angels Ravenwing list and also power-wise, I prefer the Samael and Command Squad option. I think the Chaplain is the weakest of the 3. Samael is 115 points. He is unfortunately £37 and a resin model, which isn't great. You can kit bash him quite easily and quite well with a Custodes Virtus Praetor model and a little bit of chopping. So that is a possibility if you are good at that sort of thing and want to give it a try rather than dealing with resin. The actual model for Samael himself is quite good. It is a cool model. I do like it. I just don't like the material it's made from. You will also want a Ravenwing Command Squad, which is 120 points for 3 models. You get the Champion, the Ancient, and the Apothecary, and that is going to set you back £40, but they are a great pair of HQs to lead a force in terms of getting you the most for the units that they can join, and in terms of how to support those 2 HQs, the Dark Angels do get a load of stuff for the Ravenwing. They have their own unique bikers in the Black Knights, some specific speeders in the Dark Shroud and the Vengeance, and even a couple of flyers, which, whilst not competitive, can be really fun to add into a list if you are going with the Ravenwing theme. Of course, the generic options that you can get from the regular Marine Codex, the Outriders and the ATVs and the Storm Speeders, are still very strong at the moment and have actually got a lot better recently. Certainly in the Company of Hunters detachment, the Outriders getting battle line is very, very good for them, and they are definitely worth a consideration. But I personally, again, if I'm going for not the most competitive, but a Dark Angel themed Ravenwing list, I would start with the Black Knights. A unit of 6 Black Knights is brilliantly strong and can combo with the command squad incredibly well, leading you to have a unit which is 9 bikers in it, so it's got a huge amount of speed, quite a big footprint, but a load of hitting power and a load of output, and also a load of wounds that your opponent is going to need to get through, and they can be healed back up and revived thanks to the command squad's apothecary. At 30 points per model, the 6 Black Knights does add up, but 6 Black Knights and an attached command squad, as well as Samael, does immediately get you to 415 points. To go with Samael, you could, if you really wanted to, just add another 6 Black Knights, which would be a very valid pick if you were going for that pure Ravenwing theme. He brings them some amazing mobility with advance and charge, or +1 to those rolls if they already have that ability, as well as his own considerable melee output from the Raven Sword, and then they in return grant him anti-monster and anti-vehicle 4+ when they charge, so helping him get through some tougher targets much more reliably too. The Raven Sword is very good at going through infantry. It does have a bit of a tougher time going into things like monsters and vehicles, so giving him that anti-monster rule when they charge does make him much more effective into them, and that unit as a whole can do a considerable amount of damage. So I think we'll stick with that. We'll go with the command squad and Samael as the HQs, and then 2 units of 6 Black Knights, which brings us to a really thematic and really fun 595 points. In terms of keeping your units alive, that is something you are obviously going to want to do, and the Dark Shroud is a fantastic way to do this. It brings the ever useful and very strong rules of stealth and giving the benefits of cover to units that are within 6 inches of it. So it's pretty much a staple in most Ravenwing lists, and to be honest, it's pretty much a staple in a lot of Dark Angel lists, just because it is such a good, cheap defensive piece. It's only 115 points, and it's going to set you back £47.50 in terms of price, but it's well worth bringing, especially if you are keeping either both your units or at least one of your units near to it so that they are surviving as they get up the board and get into the midfield. So as you can maybe tell, Ravenwing starting to get a bit pricey because all of these are individual purchases. There's no big box to get a load of these things together. But having the Dark Shroud, I think, is very important to just keep your bikers alive as long as possible. After that, I would personally then go away from the Dark Angel theme specifically and maybe add in a couple of small min-sized Outrider squads just to add some more fast-moving units that could zip up the board to score objectives or do secondaries. Maybe add an ATV to them to add a token bit of anti-tank firepower from their multi-multers. As I said, this isn't going to be the most competitive list. I don't think you can make a super competitive list in terms of dealing with armor unless you do lean into some of the regular Marine units that aren't quite as fluffy for a pure Ravenwing list. But adding 2 units of 3 Outriders with an attached ATV gets you up to 990 points. You could alternatively just bring 1 unit of Outriders with the ATV and swap the second out for a Storm Speeder Thunderstrike, which at 150 points would give you 1,000 points on the dot and bring you a tiny bit more reliable anti-tank firepower with some strength 12 shooting, as well as also giving your plasma +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles, which would make your Black Knights punch up a bit more effectively as well. I think if it was me and I was starting a brand new Ravenwing list, I would probably be looking to go for Samael, a command squad, 2 units of 6 Black Knights, a Dark Shroud, a 3-man Outrider squad with an attached ATV, and then a Storm Speeder Thunderstrike. That comes to 1,000 points on the nose, but it would set you back about £400. So compared to the Deathwing and the Greenwing, Ravenwing can be more of an expensive army to start with because, as I said, there are unfortunately no real ways to get discounts on the units by buying them in like a combined box. but I do think if you are wanting to start Ravenwing and you love the bikers and that sort of fast moving theme, this could be a very fun thematic list to play, and it would give you a really solid 1,000-point army to build up from, which you could then add some more heavy firepower to in the form of maybe some more storm speeders or some more smaller bikers to go and do secondaries or objectives, or the way that I play Ravenwing, which isn't thematic and fluffy, I know, but I consider things with like jump packs also honorary members of the Ravenwing. Mine are all painted up in that way, so like my Inceptors are black, so I think adding in fast moving stuff like Inceptors, maybe even jump pack Intercessors, if you really wanted to push the boundaries of how far you could, that would be a maybe not super thematic, but it would be a good way to add some more fast moving units that could do actions and objectives and more easily score you objectives if you are struggling to do that with your bikes. The final thing to consider for starting a new Dark Angels army is, of course, the Lion. If you are planning on starting Dark Angels, you will want to get him because if you're playing Dark Angels, he's one of the coolest models there. He's one of the coolest models in the game, so you are probably going to want to get him. And in terms of the Dark Angels in general, we do actually, in my humble opinion, have some of the coolest characters going. Between Azrael, between the Lion, Asmodai, Belial, even Lazarus, they are all very cool as far as designs go. They aren't always the best rules-wise, but certainly Azrael is a must-take in my opinion. The Lion can be very, very good in some armies, and if you are expanding to 2,000 points, certainly in a Deathwing or a Greenwing theme list, he is a very worthy consideration. Even Asmodai can add a lot to your Greenwing armies thanks to buffing up Assault Intercessors quite well, or even in something like your Deathwing themed Inner Circle Task Force, he can be very good because he has the Deathwing keyword, so he can grant that +1 to wound potentially to a unit of Assault Intercessors that he's joined. So we do have a lot of options, and you can absolutely, I think, go all in on the Dark Angel specific units. You know, Deathwing Knights, Inner Circle Companions, the Black Knights, just go all in on the Dark Angel unique units, or you can still very well mix in some of the other generic options, your Outrider bikes, your regular Intercessors, Hellblasters, Redemptor Dreadnoughts. They are all still fairly thematic for the Dark Angels, but do add a lot to your army. And certainly with things like the Deathwing and the Greenwing at the moment, it is a good time to get into them because you can get some very good deals and get some really cheeky box sets to get you the most bang for your buck. Certainly in terms of getting the Terminators from the starter set and that sort of thing, you can build up to a 1,000-point Terminator heavy Deathwing list very quickly and very cheaply, all things considered, by just buying, 2 or 3 boxes. So those are my thoughts about the Deathwing and how I would get started on them if I didn't already have a huge collection. But as always, I'd love to know what your starter armies would be if you were a new Dark Angel player, and what sort of deals and savings and other boxes you may have found or be aware of to get the absolute most for your army at the lowest cost, because I may have missed some. If there are any other deals or discounts or anything like that, certainly for the biker side of things for the Ravenwing, that would be really good to know, because it is probably the most expensive aspect of the Dark Angels to collect at the moment. But as always, let me know all of your thoughts and ideas and suggestions down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.